So now we get into the chillin' and stuff that's kind of tangential to politics, but it's like, I don't know. It's not really like current events, news, whatever. I was watching through some debates recently, and one of the debates, one of the people was a Nazbol, and I decided that, you know what, I think I want to do some research on what Nazbols are, like Nazbolism, because I had an idea of what it was, but I didn't know for sure, and I wanted to read up so that if I ever, by some grace of horrible luck, got in a conversation with somebody who was a Nazbol, I would kind of know what to say. And apparently, Nazbolism is a German fascist movement that predates Nazism. It originated in Germany in the 1920s after a failed Communist Party coup. It was sort of a split off composed of disillusioned Social Democrats and disillusioned Communists. And it is the flag of Nazbolism is the same as the flag of Nazism, the red background with the white circle in the middle, but instead of the swastika, it has a hammer and sickle, a black hammer and sickle. So very similar imagery. But the term Nazbol apparently stands for National Bolshevik, where Nazi stands for National Socialist. So evidently, Nazism was a splinter group from Nazbolism that ended up eclipsing the Nazbols in Germany, and then persecuted them as a political dissident group, even though if you delve into the politics of the two, they are nearly identical. It's just that the Nazbols tend to lean a little bit more heavy on class rhetoric, but ultimately it still comes down to anti-internationalist, anti-Semitic sort of conspiracy theories and stuff like that. Which explains why, explains why the next thing I learned about it makes sense, which is that it was also part of the sort of Communist Party umbrella in Stalinist Russia. Nazism is a cheap ripoff. They've stolen everything. Yes, and there is actually reasons for that. I'll come back to it in a moment. But so the Nazbols, after coming to blows with Nazis, who they shared everything in common with except for the shape and the center of the flag, came to prominence in Russia under Stalin's Russia, and they were in fact so extreme that Lenin warned against them, working with them. Lenin is by no means a friend of the revolution in my eyes. You know, he had all the anarchists killed and stuff, but even he recognized the danger of the Nazbols, infiltrating a communist movement. So the Nazbols were a mainstay in Russia until the fall of the Soviet Union, whereupon they actually became considered under Putin's leadership as part of the far left. But given that Putin is very highly, disingenuous in fronting what his ideology is, as well as kind of incoherent in describing it, he came into some political agreement with the Nazbols, and they are a modern mainstay of Russian politics. And in another modern context, they were also a party in Ukraine, since that was part of the former Soviet Union. And they were one of the two political parties that were banned at the outset of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. One of them was a Nazbol party. Basically a Nazi party that sort of cloaks itself in the rhetoric and aesthetics of class consciousness. But ultimately, if you sort of press them enough, they would eventually get to anti-internationalism, anti-Semitism, etc., etc., racism, ethno-states, that sort of thing. But to go back to what you were saying, Opium again, about Nazism, it is a cheap ripoff, and they did steal everything. And that is because the ideology of fascism is anti-art. So fascism exists in such a way that its central thing, the single object around which it defines itself, is the master race and the glory of the state. And they are anti-art because art does not serve the glory of the state. In fact, in many historical contexts, art has been overtly political as a form of resistance, as a form of individualistic expression. Nazis, being a collectivist ideology, do not like this. This is why Nazi art is so sloppy and sometimes incoherent, but very frequently brainless, dumb, and propagandistic, is because they are ideologically opposed to art. The art that they make is a caricature of art, an attempt to co-opt it to serve their means, with no real core of genuine artistic expression. In fact, the most famous works of art in Nazi Germany were the art that the Nazis labeled as degenerate, as as sort of a slight to the state, and had them prominently displayed in a museum exhibit. You know, the exhibit of degenerate art, which we would simply recognize as sort of avant-garde, modern art, that sort of thing. Stuff that you would actually want to go to an art museum to see, because it sort of it sparks discussion. Even if it doesn't have any inherent meaning, you know, you start talking about maybe that's the point of the art, and whatever. But yeah, that's why Nazis are cheap ripoffs of other stuff. They are so obsessed with the master race and the state that they can't come up with anything on their own. Fascist parties are the follow every trend brainlessly until success influencer of politics. Yes, that's right. And of course they have a bias towards the overtly anti-minority, like anti-Semitic trends and stuff like that. But yeah, absolutely. They are almost vacuous of genuine beliefs outside of X group of people is bad. You know, insert either queer people, trans people, Jews, Slavs, whatever the group of people is. And of course this can be shown throughout history in that Nazis are incompetent at every sort of artifice of government. They're incompetent at lawmaking. You've seen the way fascists behave in the United States. The laws they write make almost no sense. They are incompetent administrators. They are very nepotistic and corrupt by nature, I guess, just by the virtue of their incoherent politics. You know, half of the Nazi leadership in Germany at any given time were high on meth, like high out of their mind. And Nazi military leadership, again, because of the, you know, rampant nepotism and whatever. It's just power they crave. Oh yeah, see, the thing about the Nazis is that, like, they're both power hungry and delusional. Some of them do actually genuinely believe that that, like, oh, things will be better if we only get this group of people. But what's really, you know, going on is that there's a select few in the party that want to use that as a means to the end that is power. But then that's also how fascist movements self-destruct. They seek out the destruction of one group of people, and then either once that has been achieved, or as it seems like that's about to be achieved, they then go to another group of people. The range of acceptable identities under a fascistic regime narrows indefinitely until fascism self-destructs from a lack of support. You know, first the Nazis decided to you know, they were always anti-Semitic and had that anti-Semitic rhetoric. But the first group of people they pursued, aside from the Jews, were the socialists. And then it was the trade unionists, so anybody who was part of a trade union. And then it was the liberals. And then it was Jews more heavily. You combine all those groups, you now have a very, very significant portion of the German population of the day. I forget what other groups they persecuted. Oh, the queer community as well, of course. You know, any one of those 5 groups may be a minority, but if you combine them all, and then combine all the people that would have sympathies for those groups, then, you know, the Nazis basically ran themselves dry of support. And Bohemians, I believe. It would not surprise me if they were ethnically very prejudiced against Bohemians and, you know, Czechs. But But yeah. So just minorities of any type. Religious minorities, sexual minorities, ethnic minorities, you know, political minorities, political dissidents. It doesn't even have to be political minorities, just political dissidents. You know? Between the Social Democratic Party and the Socialist Party and, like, the Liberal Party, that's the majority of the German population. At the time, I think. I would have to double check the statistics on that, but... all that being the long way of saying that Nazism is an inherently self-defeating ideology. As is any form of fascism, really. The only difference is that Nazism has some sort of aesthetic differences, and I think a hyperfixation on anti-Semitism. It's possible to have a fascist movement that isn't necessarily anti-Semitic, but because fascist movements are inherently conspiratorial, it's almost inevitable that you get some anti-Semitism in a fascist movement, and every fascist movement is going to be, by definition, prejudiced against political dissidents and minorities of many different types, frequently ethnic minorities. Don't do fascism, kids. That's the segment. Cut it there.